Welcome. I know spring is starting. I actually have some flowers out because I'm feeling a little springy myself. Today, we have the fortune of speaking with a COO, a co-founder, a CMO, but you'll hear more about that later. I'm also going to do an experiment. In case you think maybe I don't read your feedback every week, I do. And you all were looking for a little bit more interactivity. And so I'm going to try something with meeting pulse. So unusually, I will ask you later on to pull out your phones for something. So just be prepared, and we'll try this experiment. We'll iterate. If it works, fantastic. If not, we'll have a learning that we're trying to do too much. In the meantime, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Debbie, who is a fifth-year EEC student. On her, I told her just now she's worked everywhere, but not quite everywhere. But you know, she's worked at the bigger companies, and I think she's going to be joining Facebook. Can you hear me? Vida. Debbie, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, as introduced, my name is Debbie. I'm a fifth-year master's student doing EECS right now. So before I introduce Connie to you, I will just talk a little bit about myself and why I chose to introduce Connie. So I was in Psychology 135. Any psychology students here? If you can, please raise your hand. Okay, I see maybe a few.
One psychology.
Okay, so yeah, I was in Psychology 135, and what is it about? It's about treating mental illness. And I just found that in this class, they told us there are like so many serious mental health issues that are not treated adequately. So the resources are really limited, and I also found that in my past 3 summer internships, I just found that it's really important for engineers to get access to this mental health resources and support. So today, I'm introducing Connie. Connie, she is the COO, Chief Operating Officer of Lyra Health, a behavioral health technology company that helps businesses improve their access to mental health care, mental health support for their employees. Lyra Health is now partnering with 75 leading companies, including Facebook, Pinterest, and Starbucks. Prior to joining Lyra, Connie was a co-founder and chief medical officer at Vida Health. After graduating from the UCSF School of Medicine, she completed her residency at Stanford and has an AB in economics from Harvard College. So now I'm sure that you guys are very excited to hear from Connie. Without taking too much of your time, please let us welcome Connie.
Connie, I feel like I'd be remiss. I know that your background is at UCSF and at Harvard, but I think it might be important that everybody also knows that Connie is not a stranger to campus. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, or maybe I should. Sure. Can you hear me, by the way? I don't know. I did press on.
Does this work?
That works. So on the other side, and we'll be conscious of talking that way.
Can you hear me now? I don't know what year it was, maybe 2017, 2018. My husband, Kevin Chu, and myself had the privilege of supporting and investing in campus space for the Haas and Berkeley community. So we were really honored to be able to support the environment that students are able to receive education here.
Yeah, an incredible donation, and it doesn't get mentioned that much because, my gosh, you have done so much besides that, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm wondering if you have a kind of an interesting background. Not very many people go through medical school without actually now being, I mean, you're still a doctor, but you've done a lot of other things, but I'm wondering if you could go back even further a little bit You seem to have quite the entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm just wondering if you could give me a little bit about, and give all of us a little bit about your background what might have planted that bug, because it's not for everyone, and it's a little bit risky depending on your family.
Yeah, so I think there's really two threads that have really shaped who I am. I think the first really is I come from a bit of an unusual family. Both my parents are doctors. My brother's a doctor. Two of my four grandparents are doctors. I think I count about 35 doctors amongst my aunts, uncles, and cousins. So growing up, I always joked that family reunions were a little bit like grand rounds. You know, I've seen literal EKGs passed around at weddings. You know, we talked about things like poop and blood at dinner, and it felt very normal. So more so than anything, always felt that working in medicine and healthcare was my identity, perhaps more than being Chinese American or really anything else. So I think always knew healthcare was my calling, and I couldn't have imagined how it would evolve and how it would play out. So I think that was the tie to healthcare. In terms of the entrepreneurial bent, one of my great role models growing up was my grandmother. So my paternal grandmother grew up in Taiwan, I think, in a time of tremendous, there's just a lot going on in the region. And she left her family in China and fled to Taiwan with nothing, and has this amazing story of starting a business where she would literally go to dumpsters and collect. You may not be familiar, but traditionally in Chinese culture, instead of signing your name, you would have an engraved stamp of your last name, and that's how you would sign official documents. And there was kind of a red ink that you would use to do that. So she would find discarded ink cartridges and scrape them together and resell them. And that was the beginning of what became a very successful stationery business. So, I always think about, in hard moments, the challenges we face as entrepreneurs and leaders today seem so trivial to what older generations had to do.
That's lovely. It's always interesting to hear about people's role models. I'm sure you'll be a role model for many here today. But can you talk a little bit about, since we're all here in college at the moment, a little bit about college? You went to that little-known school called Harvard, studied econ. What were your focuses? I mean, it sounds like you weren't planning to be a doctor then, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so a couple of interesting things when I think back to college. One was I actually went to college hoping to study math, but about 2 weeks into college realized that was not going to work out. So I switched gears, and I found economics really interesting because I was sort of developing this interest in healthcare as a system as opposed to healthcare at the individual level. The thing that I discovered pretty quickly is, to some degree, economics is not a very effective lens to study US healthcare, because US healthcare is so inefficient. So a lot of economic theory is predicated on the assumption that people are rational actors and systems are designed rationally. But one of the challenges in healthcare is you have patients who need care, you have providers who are delivering that care and getting paid for the care, and then you have a provider in the middle, or you have a payer in the middle, which is usually a health insurance company, could be a different entity, who kind of doesn't care about either. They kind of care, but they don't really care in the same way that the patient or the provider. So the triangulation makes it really challenging and efficient from like a economics perspective. Looking back, the thing that actually ended up being most helpful for me as an economics major was, the skills that I developed around statistics and econometrics. So one of the things that is interesting in the field that I work in today, digital health, which is there is an important emphasis, and rightly so, on proving that your service works, right? When you're in the business of healthcare, you want to make sure what you do truly works and truly gets patients better. That's what the service exists to do. So, all of my companies, Lyra, Vida, a lot of companies in the space, it's really important to have a research division that is traditionally led by the chief medical officer, where you do internal research and publish in peer-reviewed journals to show the clinical effectiveness of what you're doing, and also show, ideally, the return on investment of the service that you provide. So this could be reductions in healthcare costs, improvements in employee retention, or improvements in employee productivity. So I wouldn't have thought back then that I would be doing these things, but it turns out that economics is actually a pretty helpful skill set and framework.
It's so interesting because what you're doing feels very soft, but the way you talk about it and have to talk about it is in hard numbers. But I want to make sure that we have, if you all have questions later about Connie and during her college times, that would be fine. But I want to make sure that we kind of go into your founding of Vida and kind of what happened after that. I'm not sure why we're having that feedback. As part of that, you all, I want you to do an experiment with me. So we are going to try to be a little more interactive, and let's see how this is going to work. I'm wondering if you all can go onto this barcode or onto this website, and I have a question that I'm going to ask, and it's basically touchy-feely. It's how you're feeling today. I think it's anonymous. I'm not positive, but I won't look at it. Connie won't look at it either. But we're trying to do a word cloud. I just want to see if we can get kind of a feeling of the temperature for the room based on what you're thinking. So let me see if I can start this up. You have to bear with me a little bit here. Let me see if I can restart this. I think you can see this. And we'll see if any, let's see how this is working. I see some words coming up. See if we can find any words, delete. It's a little bit new for me to use this, but I guess you can see on the word cloud, yeah, the biggest one, and I'm sure that at least half of us are feeling this way, is tired. At the moment, keep on going. I like the great. Would love to hear from more of you. Let's get to a good 100. We got 30 more people to go. Let's see how you're feeling. Yeah, I really am seeing great getting marginally bigger, tired getting much bigger. So let's see if we can change that a little bit. I encourage you to move your arms around a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and stop for now. Thank you, guys. And let's see if I can continue here. I'll have some other questions on this too, but I think the feeling of being like, you kind of feel great. Maybe you're supposed to say you're feeling great, but you're actually feeling tired. I'm sure you can relate to that as you started your company, but can you talk a little bit about what planted the seed for Vida and how it started working?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the founding of
Vida, excuse me.
Vida was kind of random. You know, I'd worked at a number of digital health companies, and ended up connecting with the person who'd become my co-founder at a conference. You know, it wasn't someone I knew, and we built a relationship over the course of several months, you know, ideating and brainstorming on a whiteboard. And where we landed was this idea, all of a sudden I'm a lot louder, that one of the things that was broken about the healthcare system was that if you have a chronic illness, say you have diabetes or high blood pressure, you might go to a doctor once or twice a year. But that's a really broken model, because if you have a chronic illness, you live with that illness every single day. And the things that you need to do to get better, you need to take your medications, you need to eat better, you need to exercise, you need to manage your stress, are struggles that people struggle with every single day. And that to help people be more successful in managing those conditions, you didn't need more time with the physician. You just needed time with a trained individual who could be supportive, help you set goals, and help you stick to them. So we created a new care model that was more radical 8 years ago, less so now. There have been a number of companies in the space. That was really a technology-enabled service. So we created an app and a portal where individuals could connect to what we call the coach. So a coach is a non-licensed professional who is trained in providing basic health education, trained in helping you set goals, and trained in helping you find the motivation to adhere to those goals. So the coaches would work with our clients over video sessions, and they would text them in between those sessions and check in with them, send them educational content. And we found that the model really worked, that with the help of a coach, people were much more likely to lose that weight that had been, nagging them for a long time, much more likely to get their diabetes controlled.
How you talked about measuring before. How did you measure that?
Yeah, so I'll come to this framework that I find really interesting, and I've applied sort of repeatedly throughout my career. But I think in health tech, the notion of product clinical fit is actually one that you can't take for granted. So you can make an app for anything in healthcare. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're making healthcare any better, right? Is the care better? Are patients actually getting better faster, or getting better at higher rates? So the way we measured that, for example, at Vida is we created programming in a number of clinical areas, and we would have very clear targets that were derived from the clinical literature, right? So on weight loss, we had a sense of, to reduce your likelihood of developing diabetes if you had pre-diabetes, you had to lose, I think, 5 to 7% of your body weight. If you had high blood pressure, we have, widely accepted standards as to what is the threshold for hypertension, pre-hypertension, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. So those would be the markers that we would use, and we would measure them. In this case, it was sort of early days with wireless devices, so we integrated with your Fitbit, with your wireless scale, with your wireless blood pressure cuff. So we could pull that data, the coach could see it, and they could provide feedback and guidance using real-time data.
So you obviously brought this incredible medical background. You're the CMO. What was the fit with your co-founder?
Yeah, so we ended up having 4 co-founders, the CEO, myself, and 2 technical co-founders. And I think one of the interesting things, I don't know if anyone here is pre-med, so is anyone pre-med at all? This is completely not, probably not very useful.
1 person, 2 people.
Cool. For the 2 pre-meds, there's a couple of different roles that chief medical officers play. One of them is leaning more into product development. So I sort of served as our de facto product leader, trying to figure out, what was the technology we would build, what was the member experience. To your point, what was the clinical endpoint we were trying to achieve? On the provider platform side, what was the tooling that our coaches needed to be successful? What content did they need to send to their clients?
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned that now it looks a little different. So I just wanted to show a chart here. Wait, hold on before we go there. I mean, this is from at least a year ago. And this is what it looks like. I mean, when you all started, who else was in the digital health area?
Yeah, so I think I'm very proud of what Vida's done. I think we've raised about $200 million to date. The company's doing well and growing. But everything is relative here in Silicon Valley. We started probably around the time of a company you might know better, Livongo, which was acquired by Teladoc last year for about $16 billion. So it was a time when this was really a novel idea that we were putting forth, and it's been really great to see the model take off. When you have a novel idea, how do you talk about it? You hear stories about Airbnb where they're talking about their market, and I think that initially Andreessen Horowitz was like, yeah, not that interesting. Couldn't wrap they were kicking themselves afterwards. But how do you talk to people to get them to invest if you have a fairly novel idea? So I think the thing that was advantageous about being in healthcare, when you're starting a healthcare company, which is, I don't know if there's any aspiring venture capitalists in this room, but venture capitalists tend to want to make more money. That's kind of the driving motivation there. And one of the things that has been very exciting about healthcare is, I don't know if you guys know, but healthcare is 1/7 of our entire economy, right? So there are few markets in the United States that are bigger than healthcare in terms of total dollars. So there was just generally a lot of excitement about If you take the concept of software eating the world, software eating $3.5 trillion of healthcare spend I think it's a very large TAM.
So just so we kind of bring it to everybody in the audience, I'm going to try one more question here. Let's see. We kind of did that. Hold on. Let me kind of whip on through here. Just to kind of get a feel for as we move. So Vida, I should ask, before we go there, can you remind us all for, isn't that funny that I want to say Vida, like it's vital, Vida, what was the actual mission for Vida? What were you all trying to do?
So the mission was, I'll take a step back and orient you to one of the major go-to-markets in the healthcare space is selling to employers, right? So employers in this country provide, it's kind of a vestige of World War II, which was in World War II, the government put caps. It was a high inflation environment. They put caps on how much companies could be paying employees to attract talent. So coming out of World War II, a lot of employers started offering benefits like healthcare to distinguish themselves in the market. And the government allows companies to buy healthcare benefits for their employees and not pay. There's like a tax deduction on it. So because of that system, employers in our country pay for the preponderance of healthcare. And those costs have grown tremendously over the years, and to some degree, it hits companies' bottom lines directly, right? If you're a CFO and you're thinking about your budget every year, healthcare costs for employees is a major part of it. So companies really want to manage that cost. They don't want to see it grow 5%, 7% year over year. Companies were very interested in seeing if they could invest in lower cost digital solutions so people could stay healthy. And that would be a way of reducing healthcare spend. Mm-hmm. They also figured that, if you're healthier, you're probably happier and you're probably more productive. Yep. Now, it actually gets me to another thing that was actually hard about Vida, which was when you think about product market fit, I'd say we had partial product market fit. We found, we did the 0 to 1. We found buyers who've been willing to buy the service. But I will tell you, the average benefits manager at a company does not wake up in the morning thinking, how do I solve diabetes for my employees? It's just not like the number one thing that they care about. It's kind of like number 10, right? So there definitely is a market for it. It's an important service. But to some degree, it was harder to sell than say where we're going and where Vida has evolved to over time, which is mental health, right? Because if you are a manager of a company, if you work in HR, mental health challenges are so pervasive and they affect employees. When it affects an employee, it affects their team. Like it's very tangible in terms of when an employee is depressed or anxious. It's going to cost you more in your health insurance spend, but even more so than that, it's going to really impact the productivity and the culture of the company.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever think about going direct to the consumer, or that just wasn't a good financial play?
So Vicky identified another major challenge and another piece of advice that I often give just to seed stage companies. So we did go direct to consumer, and to some degree, it felt like we could talk ourselves into it. Like it's the same product, like it's just two different go-to-markets. But it actually ended up being super, super challenging for a small company of 20 people and 7 engineers to try and build for both the enterprise and direct to consumer. Yeah. Because if you put on your product hat, think about when you're selling to the consumer, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get that consumer to put in their credit card and not remove it. And there's a ton of tactics that, that direct to consumer apps do to get you to put in that credit card, right? And some of it is actually counterintuitive. So I'll give an example of one of the things that we found and many other apps have found. So there's this notion of sunk cost, right? So a lot of onboarding that you will now see in apps are long. So at first we thought people will get into care, we'd actually drive more conversion to paid. When we took that intro onboarding that was 2 screens and made it 45 screens, our conversion actually went up a lot. Because by the time people got through 45 screens, they were like, well, I've told this app a lot of things, and maybe I should really give it a shot and just put in my credit card. But when you're trying to build a great experience for an employer where you want to remove the friction, it's not great to have an experience where you have 45 screens to get to, get to the first step. So I think fundamentally, when you're trying to really build a world-class member product experience, it's really hard to do both. I think that go-to-market also ends up being meaningfully different. So, kind of another funny story. We didn't have a head of marketing, so I was sort of our de facto head of marketing. So I'm buying Facebook ads and A/B testing these Facebook ads. So I tried to.
Can you just remind us all what A/B testing is for those non-marketing people out here?
So, marketing has become a very quantitative, it's very quantitative today, right? You can say, I'm going to buy these target words and I'm going to bid this amount. And you can see like X percentage of people who see this ad will click on it and what percentage of those will actually download, register, put in their.
Is it like, are you feeling tired? Are you feeling great? Is it words like that?
Well, so I'll get to the two buckets of messaging I tested. So one was, I was thinking it'd be great if we had the same messaging for direct to consumer as we do for our enterprise. Now, our enterprise messaging was, this is a very clinically validated app, and we've used all the scientific evidence, and it's very credible, so you should use it. So I bought a bunch of Facebook ads with those words, and then I ran another.
Wait, what were the words?
I don't know, like manage your diabetes with a clinically proven program, something
sexy
like that.
Words like that. Go ahead.
And then I sat down and I read Dr. Oz for 2 hours, and I wrote a bunch of ridiculous copy, like melts your muffin top in 5 minutes or something. I don't know. In 3 months, we weren't going to lie. And I was so disheartened because obviously the Dr. Oz copy converted like 100 to 1. And so it made
so that's the A versus the B. You're testing both.
It was very marked. It was just another challenge in trying to be both a direct-to-consumer and enterprise app, which is now both in the product experience and in your core copy. You need two different messages and two different experiences, and it just starts getting really complicated. So we did experiment with it, and it is one of those things I think people it is harder than one thinks to do both well.
So you have a very complicated, in a way, a complicated business model. You've got this enterprise, you have corporations that you're selling to, you've got people that you're working with, sensitive data. I'm curious, when you have these findings and you all are making larger decisions, because it's not just like, oh, we're changing how the app looks. It's not just the app. It affects like 50 other things. How did you make these decisions with, I think it's 5 of you, 5 co-founders and all?
In terms of how did we make product decisions?
Yeah. What did you sit around a table? I mean, literally, like what would happen if people are trying to imagine themselves like, how do you make decisions like that? What worked for you all?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where having core values is really, really important, right? So the types of core values that have always guided my work are, one is just to always follow the science. So we can benefit from the fact that there's a lot of research being done in the world about what works and what doesn't work, and you should follow that. And another is, a core clinical concept, which is do no harm. And then the third is to always really respect the data and privacy and confidentiality of what clients are sharing. Now, bringing that all together in terms of how you make product decisions, it's a little bit of data, which is, how are people actually doing? Are they registering? One of the notions is in healthcare, in a health service, if people don't stay in care, they can't get better. So that's often engagement and retention is like the leading metric before you can even get to people getting better in care. And then, so you can look at data. The other part of it is one of the things I've always encouraged all of my clinical teams to do is to eat our own dog food. So every clinician who is in a non-clinical role, if they're a clinical leader, should also be seeing clients on the platform so they can use the platform, see what's quirky about it, see how clients use it. It's a really important part of product development.
It's fascinating. I mean, when I look back. So you said that at some point, excuse me if I can hit the right button here, you kind of were going from, focusing on diabetes, and then you started focusing a little bit more on mental health. And if I look at Vida, I'm just kind of curious, starting at 2014, when was it that you all kind of pivoted or shifted a little bit in that 3-year time frame when you were there?
So when I was at Vida, it was still very focused on physical illness. So their more emphasis on mental health was after I left.
Okay, now for this room, let me focus a little bit on our own mental health. And we've all, I just FYI, I've got some of these charts, but I'm whipping through them because basically this just says a lot of people a lot of VCs are funding mental health startups. There's Lyra, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But what I'm wondering is if you all can go on that exact same Meeting Pulse site, hopefully, and answer this question. Let me see if I can, well, unfortunately, I have to pop out in order to see if you all are doing that. Let me see if I can stop that. And the question is, just as a reminder, have you or a close friend, and hoping this will be kind of a yes, no, almost like an A/B test, but not quite, answer. So are you all able to see that? Have you, a close friend or family, have need for something to help with your mental health during COVID? Is it working, not working? It is working. Okay, let's see if I can figure out how to show it. Okay. There it is. Okay, now I see it. Just a bar chart. So 76% is yes. Let me just turn this off. Thank you for bearing with me, everyone. 73% have either themselves, close friend, or family who has needed someone during COVID, which just happens to be just about, frankly, the 2-year anniversary of everything closing down right now, if you call that an anniversary. Yeah. So that's one question. I got one more question after that. See if we can start this question. If you keep on the app, the next question is, how many of you were able to access it? Let me see if I can close this up here. In terms of how many of you were able to access that mental health, or people around you being able to access, gosh, it would be nice if it were again in the 70s, but that's not quite the case. I mean, we're not super scientific here, but looks like about 2/3, well, maybe we're getting a little, we're able to access it. I think that's kind of interesting, because, my gosh, that's changed. It used to not be that way. And now I'm going to pop on back here. So what you had said, Connie, is that you all were not as focused on mental health as when you left. Can you talk about what happened as you were leaving and then going to Lyra? What was happening in your life? What was the decision? Because here you'd started something that was really quite successful, and it seems, at least, it was quite successful. What makes you, after 3 years, be like, maybe I'll go to the next thing?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that actually isn't reflected here, which I did want to share because I do think it's just an important thing, is so I was really burnt out after a couple of years in early 0 to 1, trying to get everything to work. But at the same time, my husband and I were thinking about starting a family. So I actually took about a year to have my daughter, and also wrap up my clinical training, which I actually put on hiatus for some time. So I share that story because I don't know, for women in the room, I do think there's always these questions around, like, how do you do it all? Like, how do you lean in? How do you lean out? And I think you very much should and can do just what works for you and your family. And as I've gone farther in my career, have seen a lot of women who sort of gone all in, taken time off, and gone back and been very successful in the next step. So.
I assume you could have gone back to Vida also.
That's correct.
How did you make the decision? I mean, by the way, saying that you finished your clinical studies does not sound easy, but I'm just going to let that lie for a second. If you all want to ask a question, that would be interesting. But how did Lyra come about? And it's kind of interesting because it seems to be coming up again and again because of one of the co-founders.
Yeah, so mental health, I think, is just one of the great challenges of our time. So even before COVID, about 20% of Americans will experience a mental health issue every year. And there are few health challenges that are more common. And at the same time, I think mental health has become really sexy now with COVID, but it felt really underinvested in back prior to COVID. I think it was not an area that got a lot of attention.
I mean, I've worked in New York where you talk about it all the time. You do not talk about it out here.
Yeah. I think it's also one of those areas that is so rewarding because there are treatments that work. My brother is a cancer doctor, and it's heartbreaking because there's only so many cancer treatments. But in mental health, we have so many effective drugs. We have so many effective therapeutic interventions, but they're hard to access. The other part about mental health that was so rewarding is when people get better, they get better in such a tangible way, right? When I thought back to when I was seeing primary care patients, it was really exciting when people got their blood pressure to goal or their diabetes to goal, but I don't think it brought joy back into their lives, right? In terms of their lived experience, their impact on their friends and their families, like it wasn't as tangible. Mental health is so tangible when people get better. So that was really the draw. I think intellectually, I tend to think of career decisions kind of like if I were making an investment. If you think about picking a job, there's no bigger investment you're making than with your time, right? Than compared to putting dollars in. And mental health is such a big market. I think there's such a big need. Back to what I was saying in terms of clinical technology fit, there's such amazing clinical technology fit in mental health because you don't even need to touch the patient, right? In physical healthcare, to some degree, you can do telemedicine, but at some point that person needs a shot. They need, a stethoscope on them. There are some boundaries, and there are some still in mental health, but there are fewer. It's very much suited for a virtual care model. The other area of technology that I think is so enabling in any part of healthcare or anything is really data, right? So mental health is a field where relative to other afflictions, we haven't been as robust and rigorous about collecting data, right? So you give people treatment, but we have less data about what works and why it works. Mm-hmm. So I really saw an opportunity to build a better data platform so that you could learn from the care that you were delivering and make it better.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that made mental health care really interesting.
When you took your year away from being a CMO and being just an MOM or getting ready to be that, do you think that made a difference to you, or how do you think that impacted how you thought about what you wanted to do next?
Yeah, I think it certainly had a big impact. I'll tell you, when I made that transition to step away from Vida, it was hard. It was hard because I felt a lot of commitment to something that I had started and worked so hard on for several years. But this is kind of embarrassing. It was kind of hard also because, Silicon Valley is like a funny place. When you are a founder and a chief medical officer and you go to a cocktail party, that's an interesting thread of conversation. When you're a MOM and a doctor, it's less interesting unless somebody has a rash they want you to look at. But, I just realized, and I think this is really important, which is like, it's just your life to live, and it's like, who really cares? And it was such a rewarding decision. Obviously, like having children has been like the most amazing thing in my life. Going back to seeing patients was something that was really meaningful to me. So I think it just anchored me a little bit more deeply in like, you should just do whatever you want to do.
That's great. And so then you started at Lyra. You didn't start COO. I think you started as CMO at Lyra. How did that even come about? And Lyra, and please correct me, I know you will, but I thought that it started around 2015, 2014 also.
Yeah, so Lyra was founded in, I think, 2015 by David Ebersman, who was formerly the chief financial officer at Genentech and then Facebook. And
it's just a coincidence that we keep mentioning Facebook, yeah.
And he started the company out of a personal experience he had searching for care for a family member. And, despite having all the connections in the world, found it so difficult to find mental health care. And, I think there's really two big problems in our mental health care system today. One is that access is so challenging. There's something like 1.3 million mental health providers in this country, but most of them do not take insurance. They don't have to. So if you're searching for care in your Cigna or Aetna network, you could call 30 people and no one's going to call you back because most of those folks are not taking any patients actively. They're full. So we really saw that there needed to be a different way. So that when you needed care and in that moment of courage that you were willing to raise your hand and seek care, that you could find it. The second problem that we sought to fix is, you may or may not know, but in a lot of healthcare, I think clinical standards are pretty consistent and widely adopted. So if you go to a doctor and you have diabetes or you sprain your ankle, like there's a very clear protocol for what you do and what's right to do and what's wrong to do. In mental health, we actually have a lot of data from decades of research as to what treatments work and what treatments don't work. But there's a lot more heterogeneity in how treatments are practiced in the community. So the American Psychological Association actually maintains a database of commonly practiced psychotherapies, and a large percentage of them that are common practice today actually have no evidence to show that they work. So there's much bigger opportunity to make sure that when people not only are willing to get care, they are able to enter into a treatment that has the highest likelihood of getting them better.
What has become more? What types of treatment are more likely to help people today? I automatically think of cognitive therapy versus like Freud sitting on the couch and brainstorming. So I'm just curious what is proven to be more helpful.
Yeah, so they're both helpful in different ways. But to your point, the data which suggests that something like Freudian psychoanalysis can help you find a lot more meaning in your life and kind of understand what's happened in your past and think about kind of processing your lived experience. But it has less data. If you have clinical depression or clinical anxiety, it's not effective in those regards. For those types of conditions, to your point, they are things like cognitive behavioral therapy and actually a wide range of other treatments as well that have shown to be efficacious. So it's not one size fits all as well. There's a lot of therapeutic approaches to fit kind of what people are looking for.
And so when you talked about the Vida, the business model, and has moved to enterprise, and certainly that's the Lyra business model, meaning that you're selling to the employers. Are you also selling to universities? Sorry, I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, but I think it's been a really, really challenging 2 years. It's hard enough to be in college, but it's just been impossible. And I would venture to say that most of us feel like, gosh, it would be nice if I could talk to somebody. But I don't think they've increased the therapists here. And it's a leading question at the university. I mean, do you do anything with universities as well?
We do. We work with a very wide range of enterprises.
So that would just mean if you're working with somebody that there's a greater likelihood of someone to be seen because you can do it over telehealth. You can do it online.
So one of the things that is interesting, American healthcare has got all this like randomness. So there's this thing called an employee assistance program that 99.9% of companies have outside of their health insurance. And that is a vehicle to offer mental health care. And the reason companies have that is not everyone is on the insurance plan. So it's a way to offer mental health support to everybody, and that's our primary vehicle.
It would just seem to me that suddenly it just makes it easier for people to take advantage of mental health if the company is associated with Lyra. What does Lyra mean? Why that name?
I think one of the big challenges in healthcare or digital health, if any of you want to ever start a digital health company, is you can imagine almost every version of blankhealth.com is taken. So as the industry has evolved, you have to really search for a name. I love the name Lyra. So David picked it because Lyra is actually a constellation. And one of the original ideas of Lyra was to be your concierge or your guide and lead you to mental health treatment if you needed to seek it.
That's nice. In the write-up for you to come today, I realized that you also have a lot of marketing in yourself, and you have great names for your dogs. I hope they're doing okay. Can you remind us of those?
Oh, my dog. PJ.
Is it PJ and Peanut? No, it was two other names. Abigail? No. Yeah. Are they not around?
No.
We'll just go, never mind then. We'll go over that quickly. What's happening at Lyra is pretty darn exciting. So I also work with a bunch of engineers who are working to be better leaders, and they're about 15 years out in their careers, and they take a half a year course, and at the end they have a project where they're supposed to do a business landscape on all sorts of different things. And so mental health has gotten to be really interesting for them. And so they did, one of the teams did this in spring of 2021, I think that's when it was. And they saw Lyra Health as this 2.3 billion valuation, 675 million in funding received. Kind of incredible how we whip through these numbers in Silicon Valley, $675 million. And that was a year and a half ago. I mean, now the valuation is up, if you look at that bubble, to over 5 million, and another 300,000 almost additional received. What is it like to work at, what's the difference between working at a company that's growing and so huge, and Vida, which was growing but not quite as huge?
Oh, it's a great question. It's different in a lot of ways. Trying to think how best to answer the question. I think capital is really important, particularly in health tech. There's parts of the tech business where there's either like marketplace dynamics, if you think about something like a Facebook or a Google, or if you're a biotech company, you have core IP, and that's your patents are what is like your core competitive moat. In digital health, where a lot of what you are doing is providing services, and it's about operational execution, the capital raise is really critical in helping you really out-execute the competition. You can grow faster, do more. We recently announced our first acquisition of an international company called ICAS, which was a South Africa-based mental health company. So it's important in enabling, particularly in our space. It's definitely a blur. We've hired more people in the last year than we had in the past 6 years. So the company is growing really quickly. As all of you guys can imagine, growing quickly in a remote world is that much more challenging. One of the things that if you were in office, you would have a normal feedback loop that the desks and tables would get more crowded. You would run into more people in the hallways, but we don't have that in a virtual world. And a lot of what I spend my time thinking is like, what are the systems and culture we want to build? Because at the end of the day, a company is no more than an assemblage of people. So our ability to attract top talent, retain that talent, provide the tools, and define their work in a way, support them in a way that enables them to do amazing work is how we think we ultimately will win. So it's a different set of things that I feel like I'm focused on. It's very people and organizational as a lever for kind of corporate strategy. It's not just about PowerPoint slides and financial models. That's part of it, but that's just table stakes.
It seems like there is this expectation as you get bigger that you also help everybody more equally. And I didn't ask you about this earlier, but when you mentioned buying a company in South Africa, it just made me think about it. What is it as a company that you can do so that people who aren't working at larger companies who may have EAPs also are able to access maybe something like Lyra has?
So the question is, how can we bring our product down market, maybe to like the small, medium business segment? It's something we would like to do over time. One of the things you do have to think about as a business is what's the cost to acquire that business versus the lifetime value of that business. Mm-hmm. That's in part what makes SMB businesses challenging, which is because the dollar value of the account is smaller. I think most SMB accounts probably churn more frequently just because there's instability in their business. So you really need a way of making your selling turnkey. And I think that works better if you're selling SaaS software.
Yep.
It's a little bit harder when you're selling mental health services, where you need to work with the company to build conviction that they should trust you, they can trust your providers. So I do think it is harder, but something that we'd like to do.
So I'm going to shift a little bit to the future and a little looking back as well with 2 more questions. So I say that because I want you all to think about your questions as well. And Abigail and Debbie will have microphones for you. So think about your questions. And as you're thinking about the future, what do you